Welcome to a deep dive into something we all think we understand, but it gets kind of slippery when you really dig in. You.
And by you, we don't mean like your taste in music. We're talking about the very idea of a self, an identity, all that heady philosophical stuff.
Exactly. And to help us unpack all that, we're diving into selections from mapping the subject. I gotta say, even just starting this book, I realized how much I take words like body, self, identity for granted.
Oh, absolutely. And what's so fascinating is that even though those words seem like common sense, different academic fields approach them from wildly different perspectives.
Right, like a psychologist's gonna have a different take than, say, a sociologist.
Yeah, exactly. A psychologist might be all about your inner world, your thoughts and feelings, while a sociologist is going to be looking at how you fit into the larger social structures, right?
Mhm.
And then you bring in anthropology, and they're looking at cultural influences, how those shape your sense of self. It's like each discipline is bringing a different piece to the puzzle of understanding the subject.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that. And, one of the things that really struck me early on in the book is this idea that institutions don't just contain subjects, they actually create them.
Yeah, it really makes you question how much agency we actually have, doesn't it?
Totally. There's this line that stopped me in my tracks. Prisons create prisoners, universities create students.
Woo.
Right. It's like our identities are being molded by these systems, whether we realize it or not.
It's that classic question of structure versus agency, right? Think of it like, I don't know, a spider web.
Yeah.
The silken threads, those are the structures around us. Institutions, social norms, families, all of that. We're kind of like the spider, making choices, sure, but within the confines of that web.
So it's like no matter how much we think we're independent, our environment's always shaping us.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Think about your workplace, right? The dress code, the hierarchy, even the unspoken rules of the break room. All of that subtly influences how you act, how you see yourself within that environment. You probably don't act the same way at work as you do, say, hanging out with your best friends.
Oh, totally not. I'd be getting some seriously weird looks if I acted the same way at work as I do at my friend's birthday party.
Exactly.
And it's not just like physical spaces either, right? I mean, look at online communities, the way we curate our profiles, the groups we join, even the comments we leave or don't leave.
It's all part of constructing our digital selves.
Exactly. It's like we're building these online identities, and those digital spaces, just like physical ones, they're often designed to shape our behavior.
Absolutely. The book actually talks about this in the context of urban planning, how the design of a city can actually encourage or discourage certain behaviors.
Oh, interesting.
Like, think about how the rise of stranger danger changed the way children, even adults, experience their neighborhoods. Something as simple as streetlights, or the lack of them, can totally change how safe and comfortable people feel in a space.
That's so true. Suddenly those physical spaces take on a whole new meaning. And speaking of physical spaces, the book also dives into the body, but not just as like, a physical thing, but as a canvas where societal meanings are literally inscribed.
It's like our bodies become walking billboards for all these cultural norms and expectations.
Totally. And fashion is like the most obvious example, right? Like what we choose to wear or what we're told is fashionable sends all these messages about our identity, our social group, even our aspirations.
It's a powerful way of communicating without even saying a word.
And it's not just clothes either, right? The book talks about tattoos, piercings, even how we're supposed to stand or sit based on our gender. It's wild when you think about it. Like our bodies are constantly being written on by these invisible forces.
And those inscriptions, they're not always positive or empowering either, right? They can reflect some pretty messed up societal pressures, especially for women.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about the pressure to conform to certain beauty standards. It's everywhere, and it can be really damaging, and it starts so young, too.
Yeah, it's everywhere you look.
Which, oddly enough, brings me to the book's exploration of children's literature. They argue that even fairy tales play a role in shaping how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
It's amazing how these stories, even the fantastical ones, can reflect such deep-seated cultural values and anxieties, isn't it?
Totally. It's so easy to dismiss them as just kids' stuff, but they're actually dealing with some pretty heavy themes.
Oh, absolutely. And the example I use in the book, The Snow Queen.
Oh, yeah. It's refreshing that they went beyond the typical Cinderella story for that one.
Right. It's like even in these classic tales, we're already grappling with good versus evil, love and loss, all these big complex ideas that we continue to wrestle with throughout our lives. And through those stories, kids are starting to make sense of the world and their place in it.
And the book also touches on how the very concept of childhood is a social construct, right? Like, it's not just about being a certain age, but all these societal expectations and norms that shape how we experience those early years.
It makes you wonder how much of what we consider natural about childhood is actually just us, as adults, projecting our own anxieties onto them.
Whoa, that's a thought, right? Like, are we shaping their experiences in ways they might not choose for themselves?
Definitely something to ponder.
And we're back, digging deeper into mapping the subject. And before the break, we were talking about how childhood, all those early experiences, really shape our understanding of the world. But the book doesn't stop there, right? It goes on to explore how those same forces, those societal expectations, they follow us into adulthood and influence us in some pretty surprising ways.
Yeah, like even the spaces we inhabit, our homes, our cities,
You're saying even the DMV.
even the DMV,
Yeah.
they all play a role in shaping our sense of self.
Okay, I gotta admit, when I first read that, I was like, really? How can, like, the layout of a city really have that much influence on who I am?
I know it sounds kind of out there, but think about it this way. Have you ever walked into a place, a room, whatever, and just instantly felt comfortable, at ease, like you belong there? And then contrast that with a time you felt totally out of place, like you were wearing the wrong clothes to a party or something.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that time I accidentally wore a tracksuit to a business meeting, not my proudest fashion moment.
Well, the book is saying that those feelings, those gut reactions we have to different environments, they can tell us a lot about how those spaces are shaping our sense of self, whether we realize it or not.
So it's like by looking at the places where we don't fit in, it helps us see more clearly the places where we do feel comfortable, where we can really be ourselves.
Exactly. Like figuring out what you like to eat by trying all the foods you don't like.
Okay, that's a weird analogy, but I get it.
It's about paying attention to those subtle cues,
Hmm.
right? Like the energy of a space, the way people interact, even the way a room is decorated, all those things send messages about what's expected of us, how we should behave.
Yeah.
And that can either make us feel empowered to be ourselves, or it can make us feel like we need to shrink back, put on a different mask, you
Yeah,
know?
totally like code switching, but for places.
Exactly. And then there's the whole concept of liminal zones,
Yeah.
these in-between spaces that can be kind of unsettling because they don't really fit into neat categories.
Ooh, like that awkward silence when you're the only one in the elevator.
Exactly. Or like the anxieties some kids feel about bedtime. The book uses that as an example of how those liminal spaces, they can be really unsettling, especially for kids, because they're caught between two states. The safety and familiarity of their bedroom versus the darkness and uncertainty of the hallway outside, that separation from their parents.
Yeah, it's like those liminal spaces really highlight that blurry line between our inner and outer worlds, you know?
Totally. And that kind of leads us to another really important aspect of the book, which is how all of this ties into gender, specifically masculinity.
Hmm.
And the authors, they go beyond those kind of stereotypical representations of what it means to be a man, and they really dig into how these societal expectations, they impact men's emotional lives, you know?
Mm. Yeah, like there's this unspoken script that guys are given early on, and it can be really damaging. Like the book talks about how this pressure to be manly, it often translates into suppressing emotions, especially vulnerability and sadness.
And that suppression, it can have really serious consequences, right? Like difficulty forming close relationships, mental health challenges.
Yeah.
It's something we definitely don't talk about enough.
Not at all. And the thing is, it's not just men who are affected by this, right? Like, we all inherit these gendered expectations, whether we're conscious of them or not. And it's a lifelong process of trying to unpack that baggage, you know, and redefine those labels for ourselves. But anyway, so we're talking about gender and identity, and then mapping the subject takes this really unexpected turn. They start talking about theme parks.
Yeah, like Disney World, right?
Yeah.
Seems kind of random, but they're arguing that these meticulously crafted environments, they actually offer this really fascinating window into how our sense of self is evolving in the modern world.
Okay, I am intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about the typical theme park experience, right? Everything is planned down to the smallest detail.
Oh, yeah.
The rides, the music, the food, the costumes. It's like stepping into a movie set.
It's like a hyper reality, right? Like even more real than real life.
Exactly. And everyone there is playing a role like actors in this grand performance. And that's where this idea of the hyper-subject comes in. So the book is arguing that in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with images, messages, all these different versions of who we should be, and it can be really overwhelming.
It's like information overload, but for our identities.
Exactly. And so theme parks, With their carefully controlled environments, their clear narratives, they offer this kind of temporary escape from all that chaos. It's like stepping into a world where everything is knowable, predictable, safe.
It's like choosing a character from a menu. You get to be the brave knight, the daring explorer, the carefree child, whatever you want, at least for the day.
And then you leave and go back to your regular life, maybe with a souvenir and a couple more selfies for your Instagram feed.
Mhm.
But it makes you wonder, right? Like, are these manufactured experiences, are they ultimately helping or hindering our search for a genuine sense of self?
That's a really good question. Like, are we becoming so used to these curated experiences, these prepackaged identities, that we lose touch with who we really are outside of those carefully constructed environments?
It's definitely something to think about. And it's a question the book encourages us to grapple with as we navigate this increasingly complex and simulated world.
And we are back for one last trek through mapping the subject. It's like we've, I don't know, wandered through the theme park of our own identities, ended up at the anxiety-inducing DMV of self-reflection.
Quite the journey, right. But like any good trip, the real value is not just the sights you see, but what you bring back with you. And this book, it really doesn't let us off easy. It pushes us to take all these ideas, all these theories, and actually apply them to our own lives,
Yeah.
our own sense of self.
Right, because it's one thing to analyze fairy tales, theme park design, but how do we actually map the subject of, well, me? Like, what are the landmarks on my personal map?
And that's where the book leaves us with this, I think, really thought-provoking exercise. Remember how we were talking earlier about that feeling of being completely out of place?
Yeah.
That, like, you're wearing the wrong costume to the party kind of awkwardness?
Oh, yeah, big time. Like that time I showed up to a business meeting in like full-on workout gear. Not my most professional look.
Well, the book asks us to think about those moments, those times we felt most out of sync, and consider,
Mm.
what does that tell us about the environments where we do feel most ourselves?
So it's like by understanding where we don't belong, it helps us see more clearly where we do.
Exactly. It's like, I don't know, figuring out your favorite ice cream flavor by trying all the ones you hate first.
That's oddly specific, but I get your point.
It's about identifying those subtle things, right? The unspoken rules of a place, the energy, whether it makes you feel like you can be your genuine self, or if it makes you want to disappear.
So to our listeners out there, as you go about your day, your week, pay attention to those moments. When do you feel most you? Most comfortable, most authentic? And then think, what is it about that environment, the people, the activity, the whole vibe that makes that possible?
And on the flip side, when do you get that out of place feeling? What is it about those situations that makes you feel like you have to put on a different face or try to fit a mold that isn't really you?
Because by mapping out those contrasting experiences, those moments of, yes, this feels right, and nope, get me out of here, we can start to see more clearly the forces that have shaped our own individual sense of self.
And maybe with that awareness, we can start to create more of those spaces, those internal and external environments where we can really thrive.
So there you have it, our deep dive into